what I'd like to circle back to is just as I said, I'd come back to discussing the volume, intensity, frequency stuff. So volume is something that's interesting because many people try to quantify volume in some way. And I think that the more specific you are here, it may make you look more scientific and technical, but it actually makes you even like kind of less accurate and less effective because what people will try to do here is they'll, use what's referred to as volume load. And what that means is that you multiply the weight you lifted by the reps you did, um, or by the sets by reps, or just the total amount of reps that you did. So, for example, if I did 10 sets of 10 at 40 kilos on a bench press, that would be 4,000. That's right. Yeah, 4,000 kilos worth of volume. But the problem with that is that me doing 40 kilos and someone else who just started in the gym doing 40 kilos and their one rep max is 50 kilos, does that sound like the same training stimulus? No, of course it's not, because the proximity to failure is vastly different. So as a result, what we'll often try to do is just consider volume or number of sets in terms of, them being challenging. So if someone's somewhere between 1 and 4 reps from failure, that's a challenging enough set, okay? Or 0 to 4 reps from failure. It's a challenging enough set. Sometimes 5 reps from failure, maybe even a little bit more, can still be challenging, but we're just trying to create sound heuristics. I think most people are going to be somewhere between 0 and 4 reps from failure in most of their sets if they're taking their training seriously. Now, exceptions to that might be a rehab focused set where you're just maybe trying to get a very small amount of exposure, or you're trying to work on your technique. And you can count those a little bit differently. But for the most part, people can consider one set to be a set that took them pretty close to failure. Okay. And in general, per muscle group, you want to be doing somewhere between 10 and 20 sets per week for those muscle or for each muscle group. You can go north of that for sure. And generally, when I do that with clients, it would be those who have more time to train and have specialized muscle groups they'd like to work. And what I find to be very effective, much like the what I mentioned previously related to frequency, is stratifying volume in accordance with the person's priorities. So, for example, if you're trying to work your shoulders and really focus on shoulders, then we might say, right, especially if you've been training for a few years, why don't we do 25 sets for shoulders per week? Like a lot of volume. We might start at 20 on week 1, work up to 25 on week 4, week 6, or whatever. But we're not going to keep chest and back and legs all at that level of volume as well. What we might do is say, right, your chest is actually your strongest body part. So we're only going to do 10 sets a week for chest. Your back and your legs, they're kind of in the middle. So let's do 15. Okay. So we're taking that broad range of 10 to 20. We're staying at the lower end of that for our muscle groups that are well trained and that we're not prioritizing at the moment. We're going in the middle for those muscle groups that are maybe, we want to keep improving them, but we're fairly satisfied with them. And then we're going 20 or more for those muscle groups that we really want to focus on or that are lagging behind and we just need to bring them up. So you can see that there's clearly a hierarchy that you're creating and you're prioritizing accordingly. You can't expect to prioritize everything. Okay. So if you're trying to just say, right, I want to maximize my muscle mass, so I'm going to go 25 to 30 sets for everything. The problem with that is that you end up excessively sore. You end up with increased recovery demands, potentially running along that overtraining spectrum to some degree. And the more fatigue you accumulate for other muscle groups, the more others are going to suffer. So if you're super fatigued from a chest training session, you're probably not going to get the same out of your shoulder training session the next day because there's crossover fatigue, both systemic and local in the joints that have been trained. So they're the types of things you have to consider when you're thinking of your overall training volume. Generally, when people hear 10 to 20, they hear 20. Okay, they don't hear 10. They don't want to hear the bottom of the range. They want to go right to the top. And I would just encourage you to avoid that urge as much as you can, because it's actually a lot more valuable if you can stick to a training program that has 10 to 15 sets per muscle group per week, and you've never stuck to a program before, and you're putting in great effort, you've chosen great exercises, your technique is spot on. If you're doing all those things for the first time, you've got gains to be made. And one of the things you run into as you push volume higher is your training motivation might be lacking a bit. Your training sessions are taking longer. You're not as excited going to the gym. You're more sore, potentially higher risk of injury. So you're basically taking the positive things that you were experiencing at the lower end, that you'd finally stuck to, and you're adding all the negative things that come with doing too much training. So don't jump right to that. I would encourage you not to. There's a relationship as well between training volume and frequency, because I mentioned frequency previously and I said something similar to what I said about volume, where you might just train a muscle group of low priority once per week, moderate priority twice per week, and high priority 3+ times per week. And one of the reasons we do that is because, training a muscle group more frequently might um, be a bit more beneficial in and of itself, more exposures when you're fresh, for example. But one of the other things is that it is actually a vehicle for higher levels of volume. Okay, so it's kind of like if you're trying to eat more calories, you're not just going to eat 4,000 calories in one meal. Okay, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable. Whereas if you take that 4,000 calories and you split it across 4 meals per day, it's probably a bit easier than even doing it across 2 meals. It's similar with volume. If you're taking that high priority muscle group and you're trying to do 25 sets per week, then doing something like 8 sets Monday, 8 sets Wednesday, 9 sets Friday is probably going to be easier to distribute that volume than trying to do 25 sets at once in a given session. Because although you'll still benefit more than if you just did 8, let's say, in a given session, there's diminishing returns, especially as you go beyond maybe 8, 10, 12 sets per week. And you've probably experienced that yourself, where if you've done, 5 sets of lateral raises already, like by the time you get to the 8th, 10th, 12th set, like let's say you're just doing one exercise, are you still going to get the same benefit from that? Probably not, because your joints are starting to ache. You've been using the same movement pattern, same muscles, same joints, and you're just going to find yourself giving up a little bit sooner, and you're not getting that same benefit. You're not as strong. You're not pushing yourself close to failure anymore. So as a rule of thumb, I would try to use frequency as a vehicle for volume, meaning that if I'm going to do a higher level of volume, I'll use a higher level of frequency as well to facilitate that, with overall the average frequency being something around twice per week. Another caveat there as well is related to strength and specific movements, where higher frequencies allow you to develop skill a bit better. So sometimes what I'll do with clients is, if they're really focused on developing maximal strength in a given lift, we might have various levels of intensity across the week. So they might have a third day where they're squatting, even though that's a very difficult exercise to do 3 times per week. But the third day might just be a technique focused day or a speed focused day, where we're just kind of going through the motions and grading the movement pattern, trying to focus on accelerating, but we're not taking it close to failure. So you can see that as you move towards more specific goals, you might deviate from the kind of average recommendations that we make a bit, such as going 3+ times with frequency or staying further from failure for skill purposes. But on average, if you're doing 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week, you're hitting an average frequency of twice per week. Most of your sets are between 0 and 4 reps in reserve or reps from failure. You're choosing exercises that are effectively targeting the muscles that you're trying to train in the absence of creating further joint pain, for example. If you're doing all of that and you're controlling your reps and you've got moderate rest periods, mostly within the 1 to 3 minute range, you're doing a fantastic job, I think.